Welcome to Equity Matters, Navigating Equity Compensation, a webinar series hosted by Countsy. Today we discuss how to align valuation, equity planning, and compliance in high-growth companies. Today's guests are Kelly, who is the Growth Lead Equity Outsourcing at Countsy, and Amit, who is the Head of Customer Success at Capita, and Kareen, Founding Partner at Compass Strategic Advisors, who will be the moderator for this discussion. We hope you will enjoy this conversation, and Kareen, now over to you.
Well, welcome everybody. We've got our December webinar here. You can tell by those of us wearing nice warm sweaters. Really excited to have Amit joining us all the way from the other side of the world. Amit, thank you. I know it's the middle of the night for you, but appreciate you staying up because you are one of the experts on 409A, doing, I think, thousands a year, hundreds a year, but thousands in your career. I'll let you introduce yourself in a moment. And Kelly Nider, who is joining us from the chilly East Coast to talk to us a bit about how Countsy can help clients. And we'll have Kelly introduce herself as well. But today we're talking about 409A, which I think is one of those topics for those people who work in equity compensation, especially if it's a private company that you're working for or with, probably has more questions than almost anything else I can think of. So before we jump into the topic, Amit, can you just introduce yourself and tell people about your background, especially when it comes to 409A?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Corinne, and hey, everyone. I appreciate you tuning in live or checking out this recording live on LinkedIn later on. So my name is Amit. I'm part of Capita's equity management team. I spent my career in equity compensation over the years, predominantly in stock plan administration of both public and private companies. But a big chunk of my career has been spent in financial reporting and valuations, and obviously navigating requirements in different jurisdictions is pretty important. And Section 409A keeps a lot of people up at night, in my case, quite literally. So I'd love to kind of talk through a lot of that. I think there's like a few things a lot of organizations to be mindful about. And I think Kelly and I'll probably bring up this point a lot of times, but it's surprising how for such an important aspect of kind of stock plan admin is that it's sometimes little known, and some individuals and companies may be not fully aware of the requirements and why it's important and how to manage it. So we'd love to obviously talk through all of that. We'll start with the basics, and I'm sure we'll get to some nitty-gritty level detail that's important to keep in mind for everyone. But yeah, thanks for having me. Look forward to our chat.
Yeah, thank you. And just for people who don't know Capita, can you just quickly give a background on Capita?
Yeah, for sure. So Capita, we're an equity management platform. We support companies in every part of the world. So we have a software to help manage cap tables and stock plans. We also provide consulting and advisory on equity plan design, so how to structure stock plans in different parts of the world and navigate different requirements, such as Section 409A in the US. And we have a valuation and financial reporting practice. We act as independent valuer, issue various reports, assist companies' financial reporting and audit. So obviously, issuing, reviewing, and signing 409A reports is a big part of that as well. And I think that's the reason I'm here.
Yeah. And one thing I'll just mention, this has nothing to do with today's webinar, but you guys are also an approved merchant banking valuation provider in India. So for those companies who have Indian participants who are exercising their stock options in public companies can also reach out to you. So great. Kelly, known you forever and a day. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kelly Nider. I've been in the equity space for over 25 years, working with private companies and public companies. I am the equity outsourcing growth lead here at Countsy. Countsy provides outsourcing services for all your back office needs, whether it be equity administration, accounting, HR, and I'm happy to talk about the big puzzle of 409A today.
Great. And I know you guys are partners, Countsy and Capita. So great that you have a great working relationship. So Kelly, let me start with you. There's a lot of confusion about 409A. You, as you said, you've been working with private companies for a long time. Maybe hit on some of the things that you think are the most common confusions and then correct the confusion. So maybe start there.
Sure. So I think the most common confusions I've heard over the years is people don't realize when they need them, how often they would need them, why they need them. I've talked to a lot of private companies in the past, and they're like, oh, I just issued stock options. And of course, my next logical question is, oh, did you get a 409A? And it's amazing and shocking how many companies don't know what I'm talking about. So I think there's just the lack of knowledge as to exactly what it is, why you need it, how often you need it. And it really does depend on, if you're late stage, it's different. If you're early stage, it's at least once a year. Sometimes people have the misconception, a vendor's going to give them unlimited per year. And that really might not be a good idea for you, actually. That's a bad idea. So, and where do you get them? How do you get them? Stuff like that. That's kind of the confusion and the questions that I've seen over the years.
Okay. And just to clarify, Countsy does not provide 409A valuations. You obviously use them when you administer plans, but Capita does provide them. So, Amit, tell us a little bit about how many you issue, in general. What are your recommendations based on what Kelly was saying are people's confusions?
Yeah, no, for sure. So for us, we obviously work with, kind of hundreds of companies, both in US and outside the US. I think we have over kind of 3,000, close to 3,000 companies on our platform as well. And I think it's important to consider that 409A kicks in not just for the companies that are based in US, but also international companies who may have employees that joined a foreign entity but are based there. So it's important to consider that it's not just a domestic US issue you need to be mindful about. It's quite relevant for global companies. So I think it's very important to kind of start with the basics. I think Kelly made a good point. Like, you need to understand why you need it, how does it work. I think understanding, like, no one needs to become a valuation expert and understand every single methodology that can be applied. But it's important to understand that 409A is not just like some discount you slap on your preferred price to get there's maybe an assumption that a lot of companies said, oh, we raised the capital, so we should get this sort of discount to our price. So that should be our common stock price. That's not how it works. There needs to be a bit of thought put into this in place to arrive at a defensible valuation, because ultimately that's what is the most important thing as well. Working with someone who's done a lot of this can be quite helpful, because I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about the hardware requirements, but working with like a qualified independent appraiser and valuer is pretty important, because it provides that presumption of reasonableness, which is pretty important, and obviously kind of shifts the burden of proving that the valuation is valid from the company, to the IRS. But yeah, we can definitely talk through about some of the theoretical nuances as well that companies need to be mindful about and kind of go through their journey. Because this is, something that companies need to be aware of from the early stages.
Yeah.
When you first create your stock plan, you have a first couple of hires, you want to grant equity, you need to be mindful about what 409A is, know what it is, and just prepare for it.
Yeah, so let's talk just for people who tuned in and said, I don't even know what you guys are talking about, but it sounds important. So this is a valuation that you receive to be able to grant awards to employees, mostly, as Kelly said, stock options, because you need to have a price. I have had clients who get very offended when they get the report, because they think that you're valuing the entity and saying, this is what your company is worth. And they say, well, my company is worth a lot more money than this. So, let's start there. What is it in terms of valuation, and what is it not?
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, yep.
Yeah, maybe I'll just start first, right? So I think with any valuation, you need to start with the purpose. All right, because whenever you engage a valuer, this can be done for various reasons, right? When you raise capital, you want to understand the value of the business. That's one thing. When you prepare your 409A, it's for tax purposes, because that's a requirement on the IRS. That's one thing. When you prepare your stock-based compensation expense under AC 718, that's obviously for financial reporting purposes. So it's important to keep in mind, right? The one thing that 409A is used for is to set fair market value of your common stock. And what's important to consider for any company, especially startups, you're probably going to have a pretty complex capital structure, because not everyone receives the same shares. Not everyone gets common stock. You'll have some safe notes, you might have convertibles, you might have like warrants, you have preferred stock issued to the investors as well. And not every single class of stock is made the same. So that's why it's important to consider how all these parameters, all these terms and conditions associated with each class impact the valuation. it's important to kind of value the overall business and allocate that value for each of the classes as well. So, a common confusion, we raised capital at, $10 per share in our last price round, that's our Series A, and all of a sudden you receive your 4A that says your common stock is valued a lot lower. It's not necessarily a bad thing as well. It's a reflection of the capital structure, the market, the industry you're in as well. And that kind of helps you determine what's the fair market value of the common stock, which is usually the underlying security that you're implicitly entitled to receive in the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think too, one of the things that you were talking about, obviously it's all absolutely correct, but a lot of people just think you need an independent provider. You need somebody who's been doing this, who knows what they're doing, but you don't just throw it over the wall and then get it back and then you're done. You have to, answer their questions, work with them. You want to be engaged with that firm. They should talk to your management team. It's many discussions together. It's not just passing this off to someone and get it done. And then when you get that report back, you need to read it. You need to read it and look at it and make sure you understand it, because at the end of the day, the board has to accept this. So you have to be an integral part of this process and working with your provider to come up with something. Like you said, a lot of times people don't agree right away, but if you're involved from the process, you understand where all this came from, because it's not just, picking a number in the air. There's a lot of factors that go into this. The report at the end won't be such a surprise, and you'll be more knowledgeable on how to defend it and to speak to it.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, what Kelly just said, it sounds like it's a process. So when, let's say I've got my board meeting next week, I want to grant some stock options and I don't have a 409A, what's the time frame that I need to think about and be sensitive about if I'm going to be wanting to grant stock options next week and I don't have a 409A?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good time to start if you haven't started by then already, right? But I think that the valuation date is pretty important as well, right? Because all things equal, once you get your 409A down as of today's date, it's valid up to 12 months from there, unless material events happen. So it's important to kind of plan ahead. So I think we're going to talk about different things for a long time. The most important thing, and I guess the takeaway from this webinar, is plan ahead and think for the future as well. So if you're looking to plan to grant options in the near future, it's important to consider when was the last time our 409A was done. Were there any material events that happened since then? Have you raised capital? Did you lose a client that's, accounts for 70% of your revenue? Well, that's a pretty significant. Was there a co-founder who left? Or maybe some positive news. Maybe you want a major government deal that will help you get your business to the next stage as well. So there's a lot of these kind of nuances that come into play as well. So I think, I definitely agree with Kelly's point. It's a process of discussion. It's important to understand the business. And doing that prep work is important. So if you only have 5 days left, it's doable to get this done, but you kind of need to get on the ball and get everything in place pretty quickly.
Okay, but would you say 4 to 6 weeks is probably the right amount of time that you need to be prepared if you don't want to, kill yourself while you're doing it?
Yeah, if you want to do things last minute, that's probably, a good time frame to get started, because you want to put documentation together. You probably want to, like Kelly said, understand it as well, discuss it, ensure all the stakeholders are pretty comfortable as well. So, that time frame is, pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah. Another thing to factor too, people don't think about this. Like I've talked to companies like, I want to issue a grant next week. Can't you just put it in my system for me and then I'll fill in the 409A later? It's like, no, did your board approve it yet? Because then you're gonna have to protract the grant. So it's not. People think it's just a evaluation to get a report and you're done. You're not. You have to gather a lot of information pick your vendor, one. Then you got to gather information for your vendor. Then there's a lot of back and forth. Then there's a report you got to review. Then your board's got to approve it. Now you got to do your grant. Well, you got to have your grant agreements. You got to have them reflect the right 409 information. Yep. You got to process it in your system. There's a lot of little things in here that can make this very difficult and prone to error if you don't, prepare a little bit. Give yourself some time to do this. It's not just the number you pick out of the air and you throw it in your grant agreement.
Right. Which it leads to another question, which I've heard a lot and we've talked about in our prep, which is, why can't a company just do it themselves? I've run into board members and management who say, look, we're smart. We know our company. We think, back to Amit's example, we just sold it at $10 a share for preferred. We're going to go with $6.50 common. We think that's right. Why is that dangerous, Amit?
Yeah, so theoretically that can be done, right? But it probably shouldn't be done for, a reason you kind of alluded to is that, if you do something in-house and there's no like independent, valuer who comes in that's qualified, who issues that signed report to you, is that the burden of proof sits with you. So in case something goes wrong, IRS can challenge you, and then, it's up to you and it may not stand, right? It may not be defensible. So
So
effectively, you're
let's
not going
talk
to be
about that. What happens? Why do you care? Why would the
yeah.
IRS challenge it? And if the IRS challenges it, does that hurt the company? Does that hurt the employee? What happens?
Yeah, so I think maybe we should have started the whole, webinar with this, like, what is it all important? Because at the end of the day, like the people who pay the price, and quite literally, are the employees, and they're gonna get in trouble. So if you don't do a proper 409A, if you don't set a strike price at the appropriate fair market value, what's gonna happen is the tax implications for the employees. So the taxing point will be accelerated to the vesting when they haven't even exercised and haven't received the stock, they haven't been able to transact. There'll be additional tax penalty on top of that of 20% as well, and then plus interest. So do you want your employees to pay more tax for no good reason? That's probably not ideal scenario for everyone, and I'm pretty sure your employees are not going to be too happy about it. And they're going to come back to you and say, what happened there? Because the whole purpose of giving equity to employees to provide reward and incentive, and hopefully it's a good long-term story when everyone's happy. So screwing it up early on defeats the entire notion of trying to do good and do the right thing by your employees.
Yeah.
Right. And not only that, there's a cost to the company that people don't think about. So if they do it on the quick and cheap, or they're going to do it on their own in the beginning, I've talked to a lot of companies later on where they re-engage with a real firm who only does. I always joke and say, you don't go to the general practitioner for knee surgery. This is the same thing. There are certain things you need to use experts for, but they go to a real firm later on and they're paying 3 times the amount to do the valuation because they got to go back and fix everything that was done prior. So that can be very, very expensive for these firms, not only, as Amit mentioned, to the individual person, but for a company, it becomes a lot more painful when you have to go back and fix it and redo, clean up the old ones, if you will.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that we see a lot coming up now is valuation providers who are trying to automate this or use AI or, hey, we can get this done in 48 hours, just fill in these 10 questions. What's your thought on that? How much do you still need a human to be part of this process?
Yeah, look, I think we all try to become a bit more efficient and see where technology can help us as well. I think we're kind of taking a little bit more cautious and traditional approach because we think valuations are a pretty important piece. And I think we are happy to be a little bit more conservative as well. So we have like a team of analysts that work with our clients to, to Kelly's point earlier, like you really want to understand the business, right? Because when you look at, understanding like a peer company, comparable company data set as well, you can't just pick random companies because once again, that notion that everything needs to be defensible and justified, every single input and assumption, there's a bit of work that can be done. And you can't always rely on management's input. So I think the role of the valuer is also kind of sense check it, ask the right questions as well, and kind of guide the client through this. Because even with the right intentions, they want to do the right thing as well, but sometimes information is missing. So that's when analyst experience of working in that industry with that type of clients at that stage, that similar scale can provide that support and ask the right questions to ensure that company pulls in the correct information and ultimately results in a good quality outcome and the appropriate opinion of the value as well. The other things as well is that when you look at the like AICPA guidelines as well, and then all the theory behind it and general best practices in terms of what needs to happen as well, taking that into consideration is important, right? And when you look at the actual report that you receive, of course, you're going to care about that number, the dollar and then, $3.12 or whatever that might be. But how do you arrive at it? All the commentary as well, it all needs to be there. So the actual report has guidelines as to how the report needs to be prepared. It needs to be issued by someone, needs to be signed, you need to have the credentials of that individual with a signature as well. So not just the end result, but the entire process is important in the packaging. So you have that comfort. And then if you go through audit as well, you have all the documentation. So Yeah, I'd love to be able to kind of turn reports around in a couple hours as well, but in practice, it does take a little bit more time on that. Because of some of the things you don't want to rush too much. Obviously, you don't want to waste months going back and forth, but I think dedicating a bit of time and resources on the side of the company as well as the value is pretty important to get to a good outcome that helps the company long term.
Yeah. Now you mentioned safe harbor a little earlier, so let's talk about that. Explain what you mean by that, and what are the requirements.
Yeah, for sure. So on a safe harbor, it's effectively the protection that the company can obtain by engaging an independent third-party valuer that helps prepare that report, as opposed to doing that in-house by yourself because you kind of know what you're doing, and that ultimately allows the company to rely on that report without needing to prove it to IRS in case of a challenge down the track as well. So shifting that burden of proof to the IRS is obviously a good thing as well. And being able to tick those specific boxes in the checklist of what qualifies for a safe harbor treatment is pretty important as well.
Yeah. Now, Kelly, I know you guys at Countsy, you work with very small, brand new companies and help them get things set up, but you also work with much more mature private companies. And, we know the secondary market is getting more active for these larger unicorns, but even you don't have to be a unicorn anymore to be in the secondary market. So for either of you, I have heard people say, I'm afraid to allow secondary trades. Meaning, just so to be clear, a secondary trade would be where a company allows, let's say Kelly owns some shares in the company and she wants to sell them to a meet, and a meet wants to buy them. And so the company allows that to happen. Obviously, Kelly wants the most amount of money for her stock when she sells it, and a meet wants to pay the least amount. And the company has to get in there and has to approve the transaction, and that includes the price. I have a lot of companies say, I just don't want to allow that because it might impact my 409A. And that would hurt my current employees. I don't care so much about ex-employees. So either one of you, can you comment on what you think, whether that's a good fear to have, whether companies should really get involved in this, or whether that's maybe an old wives' tale?
I'll let you answer that one a bit.
I'll let you go, Kelly. I've been talking a lot, and then happy to add to it.
I don't think I have the right answer for that. I know that when companies, because you're right, we deal with early stage, we deal with a lot of late stage private companies, and this does come up. There are firms that do specialize in this that can talk to you about this. And traditionally, when you do work with a good 409A firm, they can always be available for you later on to have questions on the 409A. So if you pick a good firm and you're in that situation where you're thinking about it, you can always go back to that firm. They're going to talk to you about it. They're going to, give you that audit support and give you that advice that you may need. And if you're dealing with a good firm on the flip side to do the transaction, they should be able to talk you through that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say what I've heard, obviously, it depends. I hear that all the time. If you're doing one transaction in a quarter, that's different than if you're doing 100 transactions in a quarter. If you're doing 100 transactions in a quarter, you could argue that there's a market in your shares, which is why we do a 409A, right? Because technically there's no market in our shares, so we don't know what the real price is. But now all of a sudden you've got these transactions happening. So what would you say if a client called you up and you're doing their 409As, and let's say on an annual basis, and now all of a sudden they say, hey, we got 100 employees who are going to be selling their shares. What would you opine on that?
Yeah, I think typical it depends answer is always correct, because it depends on the circumstances. So I can start with that. But generally, I think there's a lot more activity in this space, with increase in secondaries in general, right? So ACPA published draft guidance, last year, for chapters 8 and 9, so which is general valuation of and consideration of private company securities in case of secondaries. I think the general trend is that historically, I think secondaries haven't had enough kind of attention, and then wouldn't be considered as material and sort of ignored in most cases. But I think that's sort of changing. I think the general kind of best practice we're going to see in the industry is to give it a little bit more consideration, but obviously it depends on facts and circumstances in each case as well. So I think given that extreme example Karine have done, you have one minor transactions that maybe not be at the arm's length potentially, right, versus a very active market. I think there's an increasing shift in paying a little bit more attention to this as well. And that's something we started kind of like considering more when we start working with the companies. We'll understand the activity they've been having as well historically, and also like kind of think about what may be happening in future, because potentially you might need to give like heavier weighting to some of the secondary transactions compared to like past practice.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the trend we're seeing. But like obviously, like Karina, maybe like even from your perspective, I know you've done a lot of space, a lot of work in private markets and transactions as well. Like, is this kind of consistent? What are you seeing? Like, what are your thoughts on where we're
Yeah,
heading?
yeah. I mean, I definitely see those that are active in the private markets. I think you should be looking at your 409A on a quarterly basis, not an annual basis. And I think that's Kelly, you said it early on, and I hope people didn't miss it. If something substantial happens, whether it's or good, I think you mentioned it, good news, bad news. Something substantial happens, I think you should reach out to your valuation provider and say, look, should I be getting my valuation more often? I'm not saying doing it weekly, but I'm saying, if something happens, if it's bad news, this is about granting stock options. So let's give a scenario. Things are going great. You're granting options. You granted at $1, then you granted $1.50, and then you granted at $2. Things are going great, and then something really bad happens. You lose that big contract with the government. And so you would think, well, now I'm going to keep granting at $2, but you could reach out to the valuation provider and say, should I get a new 409A? Because potentially you might be granting now at $1.25. And so for those employees who are expecting grants, they'll get a lower price. It's a whole nother webinar to talk about, well, what do you do for those people who were granted at $2, who now are talking to their buddy who's sitting next to them, go, well, he got $1.25. But I think this is something where you have to have a relationship with your valuation provider. It's not a one and done, put it in the drawer, I'll talk to you in a year. Would that be correct? Do you see it that way, that this is a relationship you need to have, just like you have with your other professional services firms, to be in touch? And you don't mind that phone call, right? I mean, if someone's like, hey, what do you think if this happened to us? Should we do something?
I think it's true, like any kind of consulting professional services, like, there's that, obviously famous consulting 101 book called Trusted Advisor, so, building that relationship, building the trust, right, and supporting the client, is kind of important. But yeah, definitely. And, talking about the trend of frequency as well, like, yeah, limited 4NA is good. You don't want to do one every day because obviously it doesn't make any sense. But as a general rule of thumb, if there's more increased activity to getting to the later stages, it's definitely a lot more common to get more frequent, refresh valuations, right? Especially like really late stage companies before the IPO as well. In some cases, it even gets done on a monthly basis because there's just so much going on. They want to make sure they're staying as close as possible to the, true fair market value. So there's definitely like a bit of a balancing act. You don't want to overcomplicate it, right? But you want to make sure you're still in a cautious side. It's always good to sense check as well.
Yeah.
Because look, in the end of the day, valuation is not a fact, it's an opinion. Right, and for example, it could be like the same firm to analysts. They might give you a slightly different answer, but it's important to get that guidance.
Right. So, Kelly, that's a really good question I want to ask you as we wrap up here. How would you recommend someone go about hiring a firm or evaluating a firm? Obviously, you guys don't do it, so you don't have a dog in the hunt. But what would you recommend to your clients if they talk to you about, how do I find a firm? Do I Google it, or what should I do?
Traditionally, we actually have a handful of firms we can recommend to them, but you can just do searches. But I do tell them that I would recommend working with a firm who either specializes in 409A or they have a group of people who specializes in 409A. So it could be a company that does many things, but who's ever doing the 409A, they need to have extensive background in doing these types of valuations. I also think it's helpful to ask them, how many clients have they done valuations for? What size clients have they done valuations for? If you have a very, very niche market that your company is in, and you don't have a lot of peers, maybe you want to work with, aerospace is a bad example, but maybe like, when you talk to the firms, say, how many firms like me have you done valuations for? I think that's very important. And, if you're going to have multiple a year, will they work with you on the fees? So I would say experience. They really have to be a group of individuals that does these and pretty much only these, because you want that level of expertise to come across. how many they've done, what types of customers they've done them for. I think references are always more than acceptable to ask for. And you want to get that sense this is going to be a partner. This is not somebody you're going to talk to and they're going to throw it in technology and spit out a number. You don't want to do that. You want to work with a firm that, hey, we're going to talk to you. We have a lot of questions for you. You get that sense that this is a process and they're going to, stand it up in an audit and be there for you. That's what we tell people.
Yeah, and I would add a short story on that. I had a client once, and the chairman came from another country, didn't understand 409A, put the report in front of him, was very offended. He came from an Asian country where he was so offended by the number, didn't understand that this was not the value of his company. And he was, I put all this money into this company should be worth more. We tried to explain it to him. In the end, the CEO came to me and said, look, the number just has to be higher. I just don't know what else to do, but he's very upset and I don't want my chairman to be this upset. So I went back to the valuation company and I said, and let's just say they weren't very experienced people. And I said, here's my issue. Here's what's going on. And they said, well, what number would you like it to be? And I remember thinking, wow, that is so unprofessional for you to ask that question. And I said, I think you need to come back and just justify what you've done and explain a bit more. This is your job. This is what we've paid you to do. I'm just, the messenger here. And they said, yeah, we don't want to do that. Just tell us the number. We'll change the report and we'll put whatever number you want in there. And I remember thinking, that's not independent and that's not professional. And so there are people out there who, are sitting in strip malls and, doing this for a very low price and just, using automation to do these reports. And I think like many other things that you pay money for, there's a difference in quality. So I do always caution people. I think your advice was really good. Make sure they're doing this for a lot of companies, but also what kind of companies?
Yeah.
Because it can be discounted.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, this is great. We try to keep these to about a half hour so that they're manageable bites for everybody. But I want to thank you guys for sharing some practical advice. I don't think we do that enough. We get way too theoretical. But I'm going to assume both Amit and Kelly, you guys are available if anybody wants to reach out and talk to you further about this, or they have a unique situation that they'd like to discuss themselves. We always put your contact information on the next slide, and there's a QR code for people who want to reach out to you. But appreciate your time in sharing this. I think, there's a lot more we can talk about when it comes to 409A and also the Indian merchant banking valuation, which we didn't get to. So appreciate your time. And I just want to remind people that we have our next webinar. We're doing a twofer in December as a holiday present. Next week, I'll be joined by Karen from Countsy and a couple of Countsy clients to talk about some of their experiences that they've been going through and sharing their scaling story to private companies. So ThreadUp and Penumbra. I hope you'll be able to join us next week, December 10th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And for now, we're going to let Amit go back to bed. Appreciate you getting up all night, or maybe he's got a lot more work to do. I know he's a night owl. And Kelly, thanks as always for your sage advice. Appreciate it. So take care, everybody. And if we don't speak, happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. Happy holidays, everyone.
We thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this webinar with Kelly, Amit, and Corinne. For more information about these speakers, please scan the QR code for their LinkedIn pages or visit us on Countsy.com. Please follow us on our LinkedIn page for any updates on the upcoming webinars, and we are looking forward to seeing you at our next one. From all us at Countsy, thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.